Welcome everyone to my very first crochet tutorial here on YouTube. Today we're going to be going over some crochet essentials. Materials we're going to be using today are regular basic hooks. Go ahead and grab whatever yarn you have handy. We'll also be showing you how to use things such as stitch markers. What you will learn by the end of this video is how to make a slip knot, how to do a chain stitch, and how to do a single crochet. If you are ready to learn, go ahead, grab your yarn and your hooks and come on back. Okay, welcome back. I hope you have your hooks and your yarn here in front of you. Just a quick introduction to hooks and what we'll be using today. Today I have one metal hook and a 5.5, a bamboo hook and a 6.5 millimeter. But to better look at all the sizes, we're just going to open up this case here. In this case, I have hooks ranging from sizes 2 millimeters up to 6 millimeters. These are your most common size hooks that you will end up using for most things. These smaller hooks here in the front, I typically only use for things such as making lace or mostly for me, amigurumi. Those are the stuffed crochet plushies and characters, teddy bears, things of that nature. And then the larger hooks there in the front of the case, everything from about a 4.5 millimeter hook to a 6. Those are the hooks that we mostly use for things, well, just about everything, such as hats, scarves, sweaters, pillows. Most of our wearables or home goods, we're going to use those hooks on the larger end of that scale. Um, for us today, we'll be using the 5.5 millimeter hook, and I'll explain to you in just a moment why. So here we have some Red Heart Super Saver yarn in bright red. The reason why I am showing you this yarn is because a weight number 4, which is what this yarn is the most common weight that you're going to find in most commercial stores, such as Michael's, Joann's, or Hobby Lobby. And if you were to go to one of those stores and pick up one of the balls or skeins off the shelf and look at the label, you would see on the label that the suggested hook size is a 5 millimeter hook. Now I'm going to be using a 5.5. It's close enough, but the reason why I chose that one is because it is the most common hook size, because it goes with the most common size, or excuse me, weight of yarn. Though the size 4 yarn is the most common, for this tutorial I'm going to be using something a little bit thicker. This is considered a chunky yarn, this purple one. I'm going to lay the two next to each other so you can kind of see a comparison between the two. They are very, very similar, these two. I would describe the purple chunky yarn as being more fluffy than the Red Heart Super Saver yarn, if you could see here in the video. And the reason why I'm using a chunkier yarn is simply because I think it will be easier to demonstrate the stitches and just to see all the things that we're going to be learning today on a slightly um, bigger yarn. So we're going to go ahead and grab that and get into our lesson. I hope you've grabbed your yarn and have your hook nearby. The first part of our lesson, the first thing that we need to do before we can start stitching, is learn how to make a slip knot. If you don't know how, here we go. It's fairly simple. We're going to go through it nice and slow. What we're going to do is lay our string here out in front of us. We're going to fold one end over the other and make a loop. Just like that. We're going to reach through our loop, and we want to pick up that yarn that is on our working side. the working side of the yarn, not that tail piece. How can you tell if it's the working side? It's the yarn that is attached to the yarn ball and not the tail of your knot. How do you know it's done correctly? You will be able to slide that loop bigger and smaller by pulling on that working yarn, the yarn attached to your yarn ball. Now it's really easy to mess up your slip knot and pick up that tail piece. How do you know you've picked up the tail and not the working end? When you pull on your working side of your yarn and your loop doesn't move, but if you pull on your tail, it does, you've picked up the wrong side. It's a very simple fix. No need to fret. Just pull those strings. Your knot will disappear. Go ahead and reset. Start over. Make your loop with your yarn. Reach through your loop and make sure that you're picking up the working side of your thread. Pull, and now you're all set with your corrected slip knot. One more time, make your loop, reach through your loop, and pull that working side of your thread or yarn, and you have a correct working slip knot, and we're ready to start crocheting. So our slip knot is done, and it's time to start stitching for real. The fun starts now. So we're going to put our loop onto our hook. We want to make sure that loop can move fairly freely up and down our hook. We don't want it to be too loose or too tight. You can kind of see here that it's fairly fitted but can move up and down the hook with ease. If it's too tight, it's just going to make it very hard to complete our stitches. And if it's too loose, it will just kind of fall off of our hook. Either way, it will mess with the tension of our fabric that we are trying to create. So we want something right there in the middle, not too tight, not too loose, something that can easily move up and down but not fall off of your hook. All right, so now we're ready to learn how to do the chain stitch, and it's pretty simple. All we're going to do is go down and around that working thread and pull through that loop that we had on our hook. We're going to do this a couple of times, so don't worry. Again, down and around and pull through the loop. You'll see I'm kind of doing a rotating movement slightly with my wrist. The hook of the crochet hook, the curve, is kind of facing towards the table as I go down, and then it comes back up towards the ceiling as I come up, and then I slightly twist it toward myself as I pull back to the right or towards my body through the loop. This can take a little bit of practice. I'm going to keep saying that. Don't get discouraged. You'll notice here in the video, I changed my hand, the tension on my hand a lot um, to get it comfortable. Here I'm showing what it looks like if it's too tight. You can pull on the chain too tight and pull on your working thread so tight that it makes it really, really hard. So it's kind of pops through there. It makes it really hard to get through the chain. We don't want that. You shouldn't have to fight it when making your chain stitch. If so, go ahead and just take it out and try to do it again. You want your hand to be very relaxed, especially here on this foundation piece. If your chain is too tight, you'll find that when you go to put your next row of stitches in, it's going to be really hard to work into that chain because the knots are so tight. One more time, just make sure we have it. Again, we want to do this with the same even tension throughout. as best as we can. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to make it as straight of a chain as we can. And again, we're just going down towards the table, up towards the ceiling, hook that thread and pull through your loop. Again, down towards the table, up to the ceiling, and pull towards yourself through that loop. One more time, down, up, and through. One more quick tip before we start our single crochets. You'll notice that as I'm doing my chain stitches, I'll rest my finger on my loop. That just keeps it from sliding to a place where I can't reach it. Also, again, if you need to change the tightness of the loop on your hook, go ahead and do that. You just release a little bit of the thread, let it slide up and down until it's easy for you to pull through that chain or that loop on your hook. Once you're comfortable doing the chain stitch, go ahead and make 11 chains, and then we will learn how to single crochet.
So
Welcome
I need to
back.
get
I
it
hope you have your
somewhat right.
11 chain
There's
stitches
nothing,
ready to go.
very few
Again,
things
we
that
want
you
it to
can't
look
fix with a little blocking
somewhat
at
like
the
this. We want
end.
them as uniformed as we can make
Or
them.
you can kind of
If
make up
it's not
for
perfect,
some of the
once again, I'm going to
sizing
say it over and over
on other
again.
rows.
It's
So just
okay.
get it as best
I
as you
always say that
can.
crochet is a very
Don't stress,
forgiving
but let's
craft.
keep going. So
If
we
you
have
keep going,
10
we can kind of
chains,
work through
and what
some
I
of
want you
the
to do is to go ahead
bumps
and
along
make
the way.
one more
But it
chain.
does help
Why?
if it is
Because we're about to start
as
our
uniform
next
as we
row,
can make it.
our
So here
next
we
row
have
up.
our chain
And
stitches.
that last
I
chain
did
on our
10
hook is
here
called our
just to
turning
show
chain.
why we put
So it's
that
going to take us
last
from
chain in
this
there.
base
So did
layer
10
up to our
chains and I'm
first
going to
floor.
do an
So think of it
11th
as a
one.
step stool
And
to
that
get to the
last chain I
staircase
call
to
the
get to the
turning
next floor
chain
of our work.
or our step
So
ladder chain.
here I
We
have
do that
chained
chain
11
because we're now going to be working in the
stitches,
next
or
row
I went
up.
ahead and
So to
added my
properly
one.
reach
We're
it,
going
we
to
need a little
skip
step
that
stool.
11
Our
stitch that we
chain is
just
our
made.
step
So
stool
this
to
is our
get to the
11th
next
stitch.
floor or
Here
the next
we're
row.
going to
So we did
stitch
10
into
chains. We're
number
going to do the
10
11th one,
here,
and
so
then
that
we're
we have
going to
10
start our
working
single
stitches.
crochets.
All right, this is a single crochet, and to make that, we are going to go into our first stitch or our second stitch here, because we're skipping this one. And there's different ways you can start stitching into your chain stitch. Some people like to go here in the middle of the V's. So here's the bottom, there's our 11th, we're going to our 10th here. And some people like to just go straight down the middle when they do their stitch. Or you can go through the whole stitch, which would be both loops, like so. Or you can flip the chain over, and this is my preferred method to do it. I'm going to show you the stitches this way, and I will explain why as we keep going. So again, it can be a little funny to see in the back. This here, because it's the one closest to our hook, that's our 11th stitch. Here's stitch number 10. And we're going to go into this one horizontal yarn loop here. This is the back of our chain stitch. And we're going to go into the stitch. We're going to pick up this working yarn like we have been for the chain. Pick it up, and we're going to pull it through the stitch like so. One more time. Just going to drop that off. And this is I guess a good time to show different ways to hold your yarn. This is how I used to hold it as a kid. No wrapping or anything. My thumb, pointer finger would be holding the working yarn, and I use the palm of my hand and my other fingers to hold the fabric portion. And I would use my thumb to kind of work off of with the hook. Wrap it around. and then pull through the stitch. I'll show you what that looks like with the finger wrapped around. So there's my yarn wrapped around my finger, my fingers, my other 3 fingers and my thumb holding the working fabric, going into the stitch, wrap around, pull through. And then lastly, see if I can remember how to use this one. I haven't used it in a minute, so now I'm like, oh, how do you use this one? There's different ways to even use the tension rings, depending on what kind of yarn you're using or the angle that you have it on. But this one, it comes under the tail and then around the neck. And I would still hold my finger the same way I would if I had it wrapped around, the wraparound style, except now it's not wrapped. It's just kind of sticking out. You go into the stitch again, just like we pick up for the chain, down, up, and around. And we're going to pull through the stitch. And then to end it, you pull through both of the loops. I'm going to show that to you again slower and more up close and without the tension ring because I really don't need it for this. Okay, so here we are, brought you in a little bit closer. I'm going to do my finger wrap just so I think you can see it a little bit better. All right, and once again, we're going to go here into this vertical bump here. This is our stitch that we're working into. So we're going to go down underneath, come right through there. And I do hold on to that first loop when I go in, just to hold it steady through the stitch, down and around. And this motion down and around is not very exaggerated. I kind of say that just so you know what you're doing. Down and around. And as you pull back towards yourself or your right hand, pull that right through the stitch. And now you'll have 2 loops. You're going to go down and around once again. Pull through. And that's completed 1 stitch. Now we have 1 single crochet and we just completed our second single crochet. Let's do that again. All right, we're gonna go in through our stitch, that vertical bump there at the back, around, pull through, go around it again, and then pull through 2. And that would be 3 single crochets. And you can tell because we can see that we're making a new set of V's here on the top. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's do that again. Go, holding on to our loop lightly that's already on our hook, down into the stitch, wrap around, and pull through the stitch. Now we have 1, 2 loops on our hook, the one we started with, the one we just made by going through the stitch. We're going to wrap around, pull through 1, 2 of the loops, and now we've completed our 4th single crochet. All right, I'm just going to kind of go through these last ones a little bit faster, but still pretty smooth. I'll try to keep it in the camera. My eyes are starting to get a little dizzy. Into that vertical loop, around, pull through. Into that vertical loop, around, pull through. Into that vertical loop, around, pull through the stitch, and then pull through 2. Last one, into that horizontal loop around, pull through the stitch, pull through 2, and we have made it to the end of our row. This is what it should look like, or something very similar to it. If you're not sure you got all of your stitches, we can count. So we know we did 10, and then we did an extra one, 11, just for turning. So here at the top, we should have 10 V's. So let's give it a twist. You know, pull on our loop a little bit so that we don't accidentally pull out of our stitch. And we're going to go ahead and count our V's. Here we go. Use this hook to count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Perfect. 10 stitches there on the top. And the reason why I like to work in that back loop is because look at how perfectly that bottom is. It looks just like the top. Why is this important, or why do I like it, like doing it this way? When you start doing real projects, this is just going to be a nice clean edge for everything from dishcloths to blankets, hats, scarves. This is just going to give you a nice clean edge. To me, it's the cleanest type of edge you can have on your base chain. But also, once you get into doing things like seaming pieces together, say you are making a sweater, or maybe adding an edge onto a hat or something of that nature, it's going to be a lot easier working into these very clean stitches than trying to kind of figure out where your stitches are the other way. I should probably show you what that looks like. I'll insert a little video here to show you what the other edge type can look like. Hold on.
Really quick, I want to show you how you can work the chain from the top versus the back. So here we'll see, we're going to go through these top 2 loops of the chain here, same stitch in through the 2 loops, pull up a loop, you now have 2, we're going to wrap around and pull through both loops off the hook. Once again, through the V, so 2 of those loops, front and back. And it always takes me a little bit longer to do this one. And then wrap it around just like before. Pull through both of those front and back loops of that stitch. Like so, you have 2 loops. We wrap around again and we pull through both loops remaining on our hook. And that is how you would single crochet or stitch into the chain from the top of the chain versus the back with the 1 horizontal loop. All right, now we have our completed single crochets from the front versus our single crochets we did in the back of our chain. We're just going to take a minute to compare the two. As you see, the ones I did on the back have V stitches there that mimic the ones that are on the top of our row of stitches. versus the other side that has just that one horizontal line. So both edges are clean, both edges are acceptable, both edges will work for any pattern that you will be working. I personally just prefer the V stitches on the bottom, especially when it comes to adding borders to blankets or seaming ends together later. I just find that it's much cleaner for me when I have that full double loop stitch on the bottom versus the other side where it's just the one horizontal stitch at the bottom of my row. I think that the double loop is just a little more stable, a little stronger, but again, either way will work for any project you choose to do with crochet, unless the pattern specifies it. And sometimes they will, but in most cases, either one is acceptable. Okay, so we've completed our first row of single crochets, and now we're going to start the second one. And we're going to begin much like we did with the first time. We should have 10 single crochets in our row. Remember that 11th chain was just for turning. So once again, we're going to chain one because we're going to another level, another row up. So chain one here at the end of our last row we just completed. So around and through. And then we're simply going to turn our work. That's a phrase you're going to find a lot in written patterns or when you start watching crochet tutorials for patterns is to chain one or two depending on your stitches and turn to start the next row. Also, we'll be introducing the stitch marker for this row just so you can kind of have an understanding of how we use it. So we've chained one. We're not going to stitch into there, but we are going to make our first single crochet into the last stitch we just completed. So you'll see the V that's closest to the hook. That's our chain. We're not going to go there. We're going to go into that next V that's right next to it. That's our last stitch from the previous row. We're going to do the same thing we did before. There's the hole. It's going to be a lot easier to see the stitches once you get that first row done. And we're going to go through both loops. That's one full stitch, the front and back loop. You'll see it there, front and back. We're going to go ahead and catch our working thread, pull it through that full stitch. We now have two loops here on our hook. We're going to wrap around once again, and we're going to pull through both loops, one, two. And now we've completed our first stitch, and we were going to go ahead and grab our stitch marker and stick it into that first stitch. The full stitch, both loops. And why do we do this? This is going to come in handy for keeping your edges straight because you will see that, or you'll find that often as you're working these very long rows, once you get to the other end, sometimes it's easy to forget which stitch was actually your last one or which one was the chain. Um, it's a very common thing to lose in crochet, even for veteran stitchers. Now that we've placed our stitch marker and our first stitch for the row, we will complete the last 9 stitches needed for this second row before moving on to the next. This second round, I'll do the stitches a little more quickly. As always, if you need to see anything in the video more slowly, just click the icon in the top right hand corner and there will be a speed option there for you. You can either speed it up if you're like me and get really impatient, or slow it down if there's something that you need to see more closely. Again, it's just still a single crochet. We're simply going into that stitch, which you can clearly see It's that little hole there under both loops. Draw up the string and then pull through the 2 loops on your hook. And we're just going to continue that way down the stitch until we get to the end. Luckily with chunky yarn, I find it's a lot easier to see your stitches, which is why I chose to use it for this tutorial. And so I don't typically lose my last stitch with chunky yarn. I feel like you could clearly see where that last stitch is. But sometimes with a finer or lighter weight yarn, it can be a little harder to clearly see where that last stitch is. So we can see this one, there's clearly a substantial bump there, clear double loop stitch. So we're going to go ahead and finish that. But the beauty of the stitch marker is you don't have to look at it. You don't have to wonder. You'll know exactly where that stitch is, which will really come in handy if you're using a less chunky yarn, especially. So here we have 2 rows completed. This time we are going to be crocheting toward our stitch marker. We're going to do the same as we did before. So I'll show you one more time. We're going to chain 1. That's our stair step up to our next row. We're going to go into the last stitch we created on the previous row and continue with the single crochets through both front and back loops towards our stitch marker. No confusion this time. Not that we had much last time, but definitely no confusion this time. And we're just going to steadily work our way down the row. Also, just a little tip. I had to stop several times during this row just to unwind my ball of yarn. The more you have easily unwound to kind of pull from, that will also help you with your tension, because you're not also pulling against the ball of yarn itself. And here we are at the end of that loop. We can clearly see where the stitch is. We simply pull out our stitch marker and do our final stitch at the end of the row, just like that. And here we are. We have a small swatch of the single crochet stitches, just enough for you to clearly see what the stitch looks like worked up in rows. Make it a little bit closer. As you can see, it's a very dense material that we make here. There's not a lot of holes or gaps in it. It's a very useful stitch. We use it for everything from mittens to blankets to hats, pillows, dishcloths, just about anything you could think of, you can make with a single crochet stitch. For those of you interested in getting into amigurumi, this is also the stitch we use for those.
Any creature you can possibly imagine.
Increased stitches and decreased stitches that you learn along the way to create those shapes, but it is simply the single crochet stitch. Just real quick, just wanted to show you a quick example of amigurumi and what all you can do with a single crochet stitch. This is a little turtle who's still in the works, but as you can see, it is simply single crochet stitches on both. It's such a versatile stitch. Thank you all so much for joining me on my very first crochet tutorial here on YouTube. I hope you fall in love with the craft, that you keep practicing, and you come back next time where we'll be learning how to double crochet. It's been really fun and I can't wait to see you again. Bye!